by Worldwire News International Desk. In a move that has sparked global outcry and intense debate, the United States has begun granting refugee status to white South African Afrikaners, citing alleged racial persecution. The policy, reportedly initiated under a humanitarian provision, has reignited questions around race, immigration, and global double standards. Critics argue the decision is politically motivated and deeply flawed in context. Afrikaners, descendants of Dutch settlers in South Africa, have long held a complex and controversial position in the country's history. They were the architects of the apartheid regime, which enforced systemic racial segregation until the early 1990s. Since the end of apartheid, some Afrikaners have claimed they face reverse discrimination and insecurity. Proponents of the U.S. decision claim that Afrikaners are now victims of targeted attacks and marginalization, particularly in rural areas. They point to farm attacks and economic exclusion as reasons to offer sanctuary. However, human rights experts warn that these claims are exaggerated and politically manipulated. The most vocal criticism has come from South African civil society groups, who say the move is an insult to the majority of Black South Africans who still live in poverty. They argue that while violence exists in South Africa, it is not racially targeted in the way it is being portrayed. The U.S. policy, they say, is based on misinformation and a troubling narrative of white victimhood. African Union officials have also weighed in, calling the decision deeply unjust and racially charged. They question why the U.S. would prioritize white refugees from Africa while rejecting thousands of Black asylum seekers fleeing war and poverty. For many, this reveals a troubling double standard in international asylum practices. The Trump administration has not officially commented on the specifics of the decision. However, leaked diplomatic memos suggest the policy was advanced with support from Republican lawmakers and conservative advocacy groups. These groups have long championed Afrikaners as symbols of Western civilization under attack. On social media, the backlash has been swift and emotional. Many users labeled the move as a mockery of the refugee system, pointing to the ongoing deportation of African and Middle Eastern migrants. Others questioned whether the Afrikaner Resettlement program undermines the spirit of global refugee conventions. Some Afrikaners have publicly welcomed the policy, expressing relief and gratitude to the United States. They argue that South Africa has become increasingly hostile to white farmers, and say emigration is their only option. Still, many South Africans see this as an escape from accountability, rather than a legitimate humanitarian crisis. Academics and historians have voiced concern over how this could reshape global migration debates. They warn that it may open the floodgates to ideologically driven resettlement, undermining the credibility of refugee protections. More troubling, they say, is the potential resurgence of apartheid-era nostalgia wrapped in the guise of human rights. In South Africa, the government has condemned the decision and requested clarification from the U.S. Embassy in Pretoria. Officials maintain that South Africa remains a democratic state, governed by a rule of law that protects all citizens. They further assert that existing social tensions are being exploited by international actors for political gain. Refugee advocacy groups in the U.S. have also joined the chorus of concern. Organizations like HIOS and the International Refugee Assistance Project, IRAP, have criticized the lack of transparency in the approval process. They note that Black and brown refugees from Africa face months or even years of vetting, while the Afrikaner cases appear to be fast-tracked. This development comes at a time when global refugee movements are at record highs, driven by conflict, climate change, and economic collapse. Yet, decisions like these raise troubling questions about who is deemed worthy of protection, and why. Many fear this could set a precedent for racially selective asylum practices. Meanwhile, communities in Texas and Idaho are reportedly preparing to receive the first wave of Afrikaner families. Local officials have said the arrivals will be offered temporary housing, social support, and integration services. In contrast, thousands of African asylum seekers continue to languish in legal limbo. This polarizing policy has added fuel to already heated conversations about race, migration, and justice. As nations grapple with unprecedented displacement crises, the U.S. decision has placed the spotlight on how race shapes humanitarian policy. For now, the debate rages on, with lives and legacies caught in the balance. Stay informed with Worldwire News as we continue to follow global migration, racial justice, and international policy developments.